A 12-year-old girl was stopped outside a store and accused of loitering. When she told the cop her dad was in special forces, he laughed right in her face. But seconds later, her father stepped out of the car, and everything changed. It was supposed to be a quick stop. Ariel Tompkins had just finished her math tutoring across the street and crossed over to the neighborhood corner store in Madera, California. Her dad told her to wait outside while he grabbed a pack of AA batteries and a phone charger. Simple, nothing out of the ordinary. But Ariel noticed the squad car the moment it pulled into the lot. The engine hadn't even stopped humming before the door creaked open and a heavy-set officer stepped out. He had a large thermos in one hand and a walkie clipped to his chest that kept spitting static. She didn't think anything of it at first. She wasn't doing anything wrong, just standing next to the vending machines, quietly watching the cars pass by. Her backpack sat at her feet. "Hey!" the officer called out. "You? What are you doing out here?" Ariel turned slowly, not sure if he was talking to her. "I said, what are you doing?" he repeated, walking over with quick, heavy steps. She blinked, unsure how to answer something so basic. "I'm waiting for my dad. He's inside." The officer frowned. "Uh-huh. Got any ID?" She paused. "I'm 12. He let out a dry chuckle and shook his head like that made things worse. "Right, so you're just hanging around, huh? Hanging out front of a store by yourself with a backpack? You know how that looks?" Ariel's hands gripped the strap of her backpack. "I didn't go inside. I'm just waiting." "That's not what I asked. You look like you're casing the place." "I don't even know what that means," she said, almost in a whisper. The officer squinted at her like she was trying to play clever. He tapped the mic on his shoulder but didn't press the button. "You got a phone?" She nodded. "It's in my bag." "Good. Call your parent, right now." She did. Hands slightly trembling, she pulled out her phone and dialed her dad. He didn't answer on the first ring. The officer folded his arms, watching her every move like she might sprint off at any moment. By the third ring, he picked up. "Dad," she said, her voice thinner than usual. "Yeah, baby girl. Everything all right?" "Can you come outside, please? There's an officer. He said I look like I'm casing the store." There was a pause on the line. Then, "All right, I'm coming." The call ended. Ariel tucked the phone away and looked up at the officer. "He's coming?" The man gave her a look that said he didn't believe her. "Uh-huh. What's he do?" She hesitated. "He's in Special Forces." And just like that, the officer's entire face changed. "Special Forces?" he said, raising an eyebrow and cracking a smug smile. "Well, shoot! Maybe you're waiting for Captain America then, huh?" He turned slightly, chuckling to himself. "Let me guess. Drives a tank? Carries a laser gun? Flies in through the ceiling?" Ariel didn't laugh. She just looked down. But he wasn't done. "Kid, I've been on the force 22 years. You know how many kids I've heard say their daddy's in the FBI or CIA or whatever? Too many. You're not fooling me." She didn't respond. Her dad always told her, if someone doesn't respect you, don't try to convince them. Just stay calm. A woman exited the store, holding a bag of chips and a bottle of soda. She stopped when she saw the officer standing over Ariel. Her eyes narrowed, confused, but she kept walking. Ariel shifted her weight from one foot to the other. Her dad still wasn't out yet. Maybe the line was long. Maybe he didn't hear the tone in her voice. The officer glanced at the store windows, then back at her. "You know, loitering's still illegal. Doesn't matter if you're waiting or not. You got no business being out here." "But I'm not doing anything wrong." He raised his voice just slightly. "Yeah? That's what everybody says right before they get cuffed." She took a step back. Her stomach hurt now. Not the kind of pain that needs medicine. More like that sharp, anxious pinch that comes when you don't feel safe. But before she could say another word, the sound of a car door clicking open behind her shifted the air. Ariel turned her head toward the sound. A dark grey SUV had pulled into the lot, quietly, deliberately. The back window was tinted, but she recognized the shape of the license plate holder. It was her dad's car. She breathed, but just a little. The officer didn't seem to notice it right away. He was still looking down at her, arms crossed, weight leaning on one side, like he was settling in for a lecture no one asked for. Ariel didn't say anything. She just waited. Her dad always told her, when people don't see your worth, don't argue. Let them show who they are. Then you show them who raised you. From inside the store, a teenage clerk, maybe 17, maybe younger, watched everything from behind the register. She opened the door slightly and called out, "She hasn't even come inside, sir." The officer turned his head, clearly annoyed. "You need to worry about your register, miss." The door clicked shut again. Seconds passed. Ariel could feel the heat of the car engine behind her as her dad turned it off. The silence was heavier now. Even the officer was starting to glance around, like he'd suddenly realized someone might be watching. Then the driver's door opened. Master Sergeant Deshawn Tompkins stepped out. His boots hit the pavement with the kind of weight that made people look up without knowing why. He wasn't tall, but he stood like someone used to being listened to. The desert tan uniform was clean, pressed, and unmistakable. His name stitched across the chest, his rank on the sleeve. But it was his face, stone still and unreadable, that made the officer shift his posture. "Something going on here?" Deshawn asked, his voice calm but firm. The officer took half a step forward. "Your daughter." Deshawn nodded once. "She was loitering. Said you were inside, but I didn't see you." "I was inside," Deshawn said. "You didn't see me because you didn't look." The officer opened his mouth like he had something to say, but shut it again. Then he forced a half smile. "I see. Well, it looked suspicious. Just making sure everything's all right." Deshawn looked at Ariel. She didn't say anything. Didn't need to. "She told you I was in Special Forces." The officer's smile wavered. "She did. And you laughed." The silence that followed wasn't long, but it was enough to make everyone uncomfortable. The teenage clerk opened the store door again and stepped out, folding her arms. A man in his 60s came out behind her, still holding a receipt, eyes darting between the officer and the man in uniform. "Sir, if there's been a misunderstanding," the officer began. Deshawn raised his hand slightly. "No need to explain. You already said it." He turned to his daughter. "You okay?" Ariel nodded slowly, eyes still locked on the ground. "Go ahead and get in the car," Deshawn said gently. She didn't hesitate. She walked past the officer without a word and opened the passenger side door. But before she climbed in, she glanced back. Just once. That single look held more weight than anything she'd said that afternoon. The officer shifted again, clearing his throat. "Look, man, I didn't mean anything by it." Deshawn tilted his head. "You don't get to laugh at my daughter." Those were the only words he said before walking toward the driver's side door. But now people were paying attention. A man had pulled out his phone, already recording. The teenage clerk stood her ground. And the officer? He looked like he wanted to disappear. But the story didn't stop there. It was just starting to spread. By the time Deshawn closed his door and turned the key, two things were already happening outside that car. The officer was pacing, and phones were out. Not many, just 2 or 3. But enough to change the tone of everything. The older man with the receipt stood by his truck, one hand on the hood, watching like he wasn't sure if he should speak up or stay out of it. The teenage clerk held her phone low by her side, recording discreetly. The air had shifted. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was loaded. Inside the SUV, Ariel sat stiff in the passenger seat, fingers clenched tight in her lap. She hadn't cried. Not once. But her chest was heavy. "You all right?" Deshawn asked again, eyes forward on the steering wheel. She didn't answer at first. Then, softly. He laughed. Deshawn nodded. "Yeah, he did." She blinked slowly. "You think he thought I was lying?" "I don't think," he said. "I know he did." She looked over at him. "Why?" He turned, finally looking her in the eyes. "Because the truth doesn't always fit people's stories. Some folks hear the truth and think it's a joke, especially when it comes from someone they've already decided isn't worth believing." Ariel swallowed hard. Outside, Deputy Malone was on his radio now, speaking quietly, stealing glances toward the vehicle. But he wasn't in charge anymore, and he knew it. Deshawn stepped out again, shutting the door carefully behind him. You got a name? He asked. The officer hesitated. Deputy Rick Malone. Deshawn nodded slowly. You think my daughter looks suspicious? It's not about looks, Malone replied quickly. It was her behavior, just standing there, loitering, backpack, alone. I have to assess situations, sir. That's my job. Deshawn raised an eyebrow. Did she argue? No, but did she raise her voice? No, but she called me, told you I was coming. And still, you decided to laugh at her. Why? Malone blinked. Caught. I didn't think... That's exactly the problem, Deshawn said. The clerk stepped closer now, still recording. She didn't do anything wrong, she said. I saw the whole thing. She never went inside, just waited quietly. Malone's jaw tightened. Young lady, this doesn't concern... It does now, Deshawn said, cutting in. It concerns everyone who's tired of seeing kids treated like criminals just because of how they look. Another man stepped forward from the side of the buildings, arms crossed. I got a daughter too. If a grown man stood over her like that while she was minding her business, I'd have a problem. Rick Malone looked like he wanted to say something else. Defensive, dismissive, anything. But all the eyes on him stopped the words cold. His authority was leaking out with every second. Ariel watched from the front seat, barely breathing. She'd never seen her dad like this. Not angry, not loud, just there, like a wall no one could get around. Deshawn pulled out his phone and looked at the screen for a second. I'm going to need your badge number, he said calmly. Malone hesitated. Is that a problem? No, he said, voice low. Badge 2472. Deshawn tapped it into a note. Thanks. For a moment, it was silent again. Then Deshawn said, You owe her an apology. Malone's eyes widened. Sir, I don't think... It's not about what you think. It's about what you did. Malone looked at the onlookers, at the phones, then back at the car. He walked slowly over to the passenger side window and leaned just enough to be heard. I'm sorry, he said. It sounded like it burned his throat. Ariel didn't move. She didn't answer. Deshawn gave a single nod. Let's go. They got into the car and pulled out slowly. No squealing tires, no dramatic exit, just silence. But the parking lot wasn't the same anymore. What started as a one-on-one turned into a mirror held up to everyone who watched. And some didn't like what they saw. But that was only the surface. The fallout hadn't even started yet. They hadn't even reached the end of the block when Ariel noticed her phone vibrating. Non-stop. Texts, missed calls, group messages from classmates, even a cousin from Bakersfield she hadn't talked to in months. Dad. Deshawn was watching the road, eyes steady. I know. She glanced down. One of the videos from the store had already hit social media. The title, Cop Laughs at 12-year-old Black Girl. Her dad shows up in uniform. The comments were flooding in. Some were supportive, others weren't. She sank into her seat, her thoughts a mess of embarrassment and disbelief. Why would they post it? Deshawn didn't raise his voice. Because people film everything now. And sometimes that's what it takes for others to finally pay attention. By the time they pulled into the driveway, Ariel's stomach felt hollow. Their neighbor, Mrs. Culver, waved from across the street but didn't say anything. She looked unsure. Like she'd seen the clip, wasn't sure what side of it she landed on, and didn't want to ask. Inside the house, Ariel dropped her bag and kicked off her shoes like usual. But everything felt heavy. Go wash up, Deshawn said. We're having dinner like we always do. But dinner wasn't like usual. They sat at the table with baked chicken, green beans, and cornbread. But the tension sat between them like a third person. Quiet. Watching. I didn't do anything wrong. Ariel finally whispered. I know you didn't, Deshawn said. So why did it feel like I was the one on trial? Deshawn took a deep breath. Because when people see you, they don't always see you. They see what they've been told to expect. Doesn't matter how kind, how polite, how smart you are. Some folks see a threat where there is none. She was quiet for a while. I didn't cry, she said. I know, but I wanted to. That's okay too. Her voice cracked slightly. He laughed in my face, Dad. He looked at her. And you stood there anyway. That takes guts. More than most people have. She stared at her plate, untouched. Deshawn leaned back. You want to hear something? She looked up. When I was 13, I was stopped walking home from football practice. Had my pads and everything. Cop told me I matched a description. You know what the description was? What? He said, young, dark hoodie, tall. That was it. Like I was a sketch. What did you do? I told him the truth, that I was on my way home. He didn't believe me either. Had me sit on the curb. Asked if my parents were home. Said my story sounded made up. Ariel blinked. What happened? Eventually a neighbor saw me, came out yelling, and the cop backed off. But the feeling? That stuck. I knew that if I had moved wrong or raised my voice, things could have gone sideways. He paused, then added, that's the weight we carry. But it doesn't mean we carry it alone. Ariel sat up straighter. So what now? Everyone's seen the video. They're talking about me like I'm some kind of story. Deshawn shrugged. Maybe you are, but you're more than that too. You're a person, and you deserve to be treated like one. There was a knock at the door. Not loud, more like a polite tap. Deshawn stood slowly and opened it. It was the store clerk, the teenage girl from earlier. She stood nervously, holding a manila envelope. Hi, she said, eyes darting past him to glimpse Ariel. I printed out the video from the security cameras. Just thought you might want a copy. Also, I filed a complaint with my manager about how the officer talked to her. I didn't want it to just disappear. Deshawn looked at her. That was brave. She nodded, uncomfortable. I don't know if it changes anything, but it does, he said. More than you know. She handed him the envelope and left without another word. He closed the door behind her and turned to Ariel. Sometimes people surprise you. But sometimes they reveal exactly who they've been all along, and that's when the real conversation begins. By the next morning, the clip had spread far beyond their neighborhood. It was being talked about on Facebook, reposted on Twitter, and debated on podcasts that had never once mentioned Madera, California. Local news ran it during the evening segment. The headline was simple but sharp. Young girl confronted outside store. Father's calm response sparks debate. Ariel sat on the edge of her bed, phone in her lap, scrolling through messages she hadn't asked for. Some were kind. Encouraging. You're brave, they said. That officer had no right, but others, they weren't so gentle. One message read, bet she was lying. Kids always lie. Another, why make everything about race? A third just said, this generation's too soft. She turned the screen over and let it fall onto her blanket. Downstairs, her dad was on the phone with someone from the sheriff's department. They'd called early, asked for a statement about the incident. Said they were reviewing conduct. Deshawn wasn't rude, but he wasn't rushed either. He explained what happened, gave them the badge number, and said everything else was already in the video. When he hung up, he walked into the kitchen and found Ariel standing at the counter, pouring cereal into a bowl she wasn't planning to eat. You okay? He asked. She didn't answer at first. Then, why are people mad at me for telling the truth? He walked over and leaned on the counter. Because the truth makes people uncomfortable, especially when it shows them something they don't want to see. But I didn't yell. I didn't run. I didn't even talk back. You didn't have to. Sometimes just being present is enough for people to see you as a problem. She stirred the cereal. So what do I do now? Deshawn thought for a moment. You live. You keep being who you are. You stay smart. Stay kind. Don't shrink for anyone. But what if it happens again? Then you do what you did this time. You stand still, speak clearly, and know I've got your back. Ariel finally took a bite of her cereal. It had gone soggy, but she didn't mind. Later that afternoon, someone knocked again. It was Mr. Delano from the local paper. He asked for a comment, said he was doing a story about bias and policing in the county. Deshawn politely declined, said their statement was in the video. But before he closed the door, Mr. Delano handed Ariel a folded note. She opened it after he left. It was a quote. You may not control all the events that happen to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them. Maya Angelou. Ariel read it twice, then 3 times. She taped it to the side of her mirror. That night, after homework, she sat on the couch next to her dad while he watched old military documentaries on TV. She wasn't really paying attention to the screen. She kept thinking about the moment the officer laughed at her. How small she'd felt. How it had stayed with her long after the car ride home. Dad? Yeah? Do people ever stop assuming? He looked away from the screen. Some do. Some never will. But the way they see you doesn't define who you are. She nodded slowly. I want to talk about it. Talk about what? What happened? Not for drama. Just so other kids don't feel crazy when it happens to them. Deshawn turned down the volume. You sure? I think so. He studied her face for a moment, then gave a quiet nod. All right, but we do it your way, on your time. But the time was closer than either of them expected, and it would come from a place they hadn't planned for. It started with a message from Ms. Portillo, Ariel's English teacher. She'd seen the video and reached out directly, not through the school system, but as a person who cared. I just want you to know, she wrote, you have every right to take up space in this world. If you ever feel ready to talk about it in class, I'd be proud to make the time. Ariel stared at that message for a long time. She wasn't sure what made her say yes. Maybe it was the note from the newspaper. Maybe it was the girl from the store who stepped forward. Or maybe she just got tired of feeling like a problem when she knew she wasn't one. The following week, Ms. Portillo cleared 15 minutes during a Monday writing block. Ariel stood at the front of the classroom with her note cards, fingers stiff, heart punching her ribs. I didn't do anything wrong, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. 26 heads turned to face her. Some curious, some confused, 1 or 2 even skeptical. But they were listening. I wasn't stealing. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't even inside the store. But the officer didn't believe me when I told him who my dad was. He laughed. A few kids shifted in their seats. No one interrupted. My dad did show up. In uniform, just like I said. And when he came, everything changed. Suddenly the officer got quiet. People started filming. Then the whole thing became a story. She paused, gathering herself. But I was a person before it was a story. Miss Portillo wiped at her eyes with the corner of her sleeve. One of the boys in the back whispered, "That's messed up," to no one in particular. Later that night, Deshawn sat across from Ariel at the dinner table again. She told him what happened, how the kids reacted, how quiet the room had gotten. Did it help? He asked. She nodded. Yeah, a little. Deshawn leaned back, thoughtful. Then he said something he hadn't told her before. You know why I joined the military? She shook her head. I was 17. Got pulled over on my way home from a football game. The officer didn't like that I didn't answer fast enough when he asked where I lived. Had me get out of the car, hands on the hood, whole bit. Ariel's eyes widened. I remember thinking, if this is what it means to be seen as dangerous, I might as well become someone who knows how to handle dangerous things. So I enlisted. He didn't say it with pride. He said it like a man remembering a moment that had changed his path. I stayed in for 20 years, learned how to lead, how to stay calm under pressure. But I never forgot that feeling of being doubted just for showing up in my own skin. Ariel took that in. Every piece of it. I don't want to join the military, she said quietly. Deshawn chuckled. Good. You shouldn't do anything just because the world scares you into it. She smiled a little, then asked, what should I do? Tell the truth. Keep telling it, and make room for others to tell theirs. He pointed toward her bedroom. You taped a quote to your mirror. You did that. That was your first step. She grinned. What if people still don't believe me? Then you speak anyway. You don't need their permission to be right. There was silence for a moment. The kind that feels earned. That weekend, they were invited to a youth panel at the community center. Ariel sat on stage beside 3 high school students and a young local activist. She told her story again, this time with no note cards. Just her voice. Some parents in the crowd nodded slowly. One woman teared up. A man in the back stood the whole time, arms crossed, unreadable, but listening. When she finished, they clapped. Not polite applause, real, sustained clapping. Later that night, as she and Deshawn drove home, she looked out the window and said, "I don't feel small anymore." He didn't respond right away. You never were. But she was starting to believe that now. For herself, and maybe even for others who'd stopped believing too soon. Almost 1 year to the day after the incident, Ariel stood behind a podium inside the multipurpose room at Central Valley Middle School. The folding chairs were packed. Parents, teachers, classmates. Some she recognized, others she didn't. All seated facing the stage. She was the youngest speaker on the program. The flyer called it the Youth Leadership and Resilience Forum. But Ariel didn't care about the name. All she cared about was telling the truth. Her truth. She adjusted the microphone. Her voice didn't shake this time. "I'm not here to talk about a viral video," she began. "I'm here to talk about what it feels like to be seen as a lie before you say a word." The room was quiet. That kind of stillness that doesn't need to be asked for. It just happens when people lean in. I was 12, standing outside a store. I wasn't doing anything wrong, but I was treated like I didn't belong. And when I said my dad was in the military, I got laughed at. Not because it was funny, but because the officer didn't think someone like me could be telling the truth. She paused, looked out at the audience, then continued. That moment could have made me bitter. It could have made me silent. But I had someone beside me who taught me that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just stands there, calm, unshaken, unmoving. In the front row, Deshawn sat in a simple black polo, arms folded, not out of defiance, but peace. He'd heard every version of her story by now, but this was the first time he watched her own it without his help. "I'm not the only kid who's been questioned for simply existing. I won't be the last. But I want to say this, especially to anyone in this room who's ever been made to feel small or invisible, or like your truth is too big for people to believe." Ariel took a breath, then leaned slightly closer to the mic. "You don't have to make yourself smaller for someone else to feel comfortable. You don't have to lie just because the truth makes them flinch. And if they laugh, let them. That says more about them than it ever will about you." Scattered applause rose across the room. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was real. After the event, people came up one by one. Some thanked her, some just shook her hand. One boy said his older brother had been stopped by police while biking home and told him not to talk about it. Ariel didn't offer advice. She just listened. Sometimes that's all someone really needs. Back home that evening, Ariel placed a folder on her desk. Inside were newspaper clippings, printed emails, even a thank you note from the county sheriff's office. Unsigned, but official. Deshawn knocked softly on her door. "You did good today," she smiled. "Thanks." "You meant every word up there?" She nodded. "Every single one." He walked in and sat on the edge of her bed, like he used to when she was little. "You know what I liked best," he said. "What?" "That line about strength not always shouting. I think that's what made people stop and listen." She looked at him. "You taught me that." He shrugged. "I just reminded you. It was already in you." They sat for a few seconds in comfortable silence. Then Ariel asked, "Do you think Deputy Malone, ever saw the video?" "I'd bet he did," Deshawn said. "Probably more than once. Do you think he regrets it?" "I don't know. Maybe, maybe not." Ariel considered that, then said, "I hope he does. But I didn't do this for him." Deshawn smiled. "Exactly." That night, she added one last note to her mirror, written in her own handwriting, in a thick black marker. "Being doubted doesn't make you wrong. Keep standing." She didn't need permission anymore, and she sure didn't need anyone to laugh for her story to matter. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is just stand long enough for the truth to catch up. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that their truth matters. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe. These stories aren't just about what happens. They're about what we choose to do next.